We are live. The devil really didn't want us to go live, I think, today. Throwing up as many roadblocks as possible. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Plotlines, where we are building a Catholic society through culture. I'm your host, Connor. Today, we are continuing the review of the Rings of Power, and joining us is the author of Sword and the Serpent and Infiltration, Dr. Taylor Marshall. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Connor, good to be here. It's good to meet you when you're down in Dallas, and this should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited. It was fantastic meeting you in person. And that, funny enough, that was our first interaction. But
Yeah, that was great. We got to smoke a cigar and hang out and go to the Blessed Carl Symposium, and it's good.
Yeah. Anyways, so we're talking about the Rings of Power. My understanding is you've watched some of it, but not all of it, which is totally fine because this show is often me explaining to guests what has happened in the show because not everyone watches it, and that's kind of the point of the show is so not everyone has to. So how far did you get?
So my wife was not a big fan of the whole idea, and I was like, well, I want to give it a chance. So I, by myself, watched the first episode, and I was like, that's not really grabbing me. I'll give it another one. I watched the second episode, and then I think I got into the third, and I think that's about where I stopped.
Gotcha. So what was the last thing that you remembered?
God, it's been a while now. So I remember Galadriel was on a boat.
Okay.
And yeah, she had like searching the ends of the world for orcs, and there's kind of going to be a mutiny against her. And she was swimming, and there's people afloat, and she got on. No, she went back into the world or something, and then there is this people on a raft, and then a big whale attacked them.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's about all I remember. What episode's that?
I feel like that's 2. I
Okay.
think that was episode 2. Now,
and then there was also a little village of hobbits, and one guy broke his ankle.
Oh, wait, I think that's further down, or I'm not mistaken.
Okay, maybe it is.
It all blends together, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's quite.
That's kind of the most
show.
recent things that I think I saw on there.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So I'm just gonna give a little bit of an overview of sort of the storylines because it's a very complicated show because it has all these different threads going on at once. So we got the High Elves, we've got Galadriel sort of going on these missions to find Sauron, but then she is reined in because her king doesn't want her to go, doesn't want to create like worry, I guess. He's afraid of people being worried that because of the fact that she's going out there, and she's also incredibly annoying, which actually later in the show it's revealed that literally the king wanted her gone just because she was annoying and that he knew that evil was still around.
Well, I recognized right away that she was not likable, whereas in the books she has this aura. I mean, she's not like likable in the books, but you have this sort of profound respect for her.
She's much more gentle too.
Yes, she's gentle and powerful, whereas in the Ring of Power series she was kind of like naggy and bossy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting. She actually tells somebody later in the show that that basically her soldiers couldn't tell the difference between her and Sauron. So they thought she was just as bad as Sauron or something like that, but she knows that.
Okay.
Like,
yeah,
it's completely illogical because it's taken from the premise that she knows this and she's still doing it anyways. But they kind of later reveal in the show that her husband went missing a long time ago.
Oh.
Yeah. Which
he just went missing?
He like went to war and never came back.
Maybe he didn't like being around her.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like what you get from the show. You wouldn't get, oh, he's been trying, he'll try and get back to her. Like, why would she's not very likable anyways.
Yeah.
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 So
So that's kind of the main problem. And then the other thing I noticed is, well, I don't know. Maybe you want me to do my reflections later. I'll let you
well,
keep summarizing.
yeah, let me just get through some, at least some of the storyline. So Galadriel is goes on the ship to go to Valinor, which she can't because in the books, because she's banned from going to Valinor. It wasn't just her choice not to go back, but she also was banned for being prideful. Which, to be fair, she does have a lot of pride in the show. There is that. The problem is she's not a warrior. She's not this. She's not here to destroy everyone, and she basically jumps off the ship because her brother once told her that she needs to touch the darkness to know the light, which is basically a ridiculous form of morality. You need to touch evil. You need to be evil a little bit so you understand what good is.
Yeah, that's pretty insidious. I mean, that's a lot of the early Gnostic groups in the early church believe that you should try to commit as many, mortal sins, wickedness, so that you would better appreciate the grace of God.
Yeah. And interesting enough, it seems in the end that she kind of resists that phrase that uh she originally sort of said, let's do it. Like she basically jumps off the boat, and then seemingly like she's joining the darkness or deciding to learn what darkness is, basically learning what good and evil are, kind of. Doesn't it sound kind of like the tree of life
Yeah,
a little bit?
definitely. Yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
satanic a deal.
Yeah. So, and this is her brother, who's supposed to be the big enemy, or one of the big enemies of Sauron. Finrod is one of the most likable and admirable characters from the Silmarillion, and he is the most selfless character in those books. Even though a lot of elves are, messing up the plans, they are going against what they should be doing, but he's usually the one that's doing the right thing, and instead he's apparently giving this terrible advice to his little sister.
Right.
Yeah. So we have her finding this group of people in the middle of the ocean, which doesn't make any sense unless she like swam miles upon miles upon miles from where she was, because she was pretty much at the edge of the sea going into Valinor. And then she's suddenly near a place where a shipwreck could have been, which would have had to be kind of near land on the other side of the sea.
Yeah.
So she's stuck there with these guys. One of them is Halbrand, who is totally not Sauron. Everyone sort of pretty much understood that he was going to be Sauron the entire time.
Oh, I
He
didn't know that. Is that
Really?
is that supposed to be Sauron?
It is Sauron in the end. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I didn't pick
Which
up on that.
she's they save each other a few times, which is kind of funny. The thing is,
Yeah.
Sauron is supposed to be good looking, and I mean he's supposed to be an elf. He's supposed to pretend to be an elf in the beginning, which they just changed that. But everyone kind of or not everyone, I should say, a lot of hyper internet nerds. I guess that's probably the best way to understand it. Hyper internet nerds already thought, okay, this is their sort of handsome-ish guy who's from a made up people, because that's really what they did with the village of men, with the elves looking after them. It's just a made up group of people, so you kind of know that they have to get rid of them by the end of the show, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to have them, because they don't exist in the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
So basically Halbrand is basically a subversion of Aragorn. He is
So
Aragorn.
that's what I mean, I knew it couldn't be Aragorn because of the ages and the
Sure.
times,
Yeah.
but I felt whoever the director was trying to make that connection for me, even though I knew it was impossible. So I didn't know that was going to be Sauron. when I was watching it. But now that you explain all that, yeah, I was just from the films, not the books. I was thinking, okay, they're trying to get Aragorn something going here, even though it couldn't
Yeah.
be.
He's definitely a Aragorn-like character from
Yeah.
the outset. He seems like that mysterious, rugged, kind of charming to some degree. He's much more likable than Galadriel, which is kind of funny. And you can see that her saying that her people couldn't tell the difference between her and Sauron. Well, makes sense because she acts worse than Sauron, even when compared to Sauron. She's interacting with Sauron the entire time.
Right.
And Sauron is just manipulating her. But it's also kind of strange because he's trying to search for redemption, or at least that's what he says he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Like
Now, can I ask a question? Because you're
sure.
you're much more well read on all the Tolkien lore. I've only read it a couple of times. There is kind of, if I remember correctly in the books, isn't there kind of like something dark or scary about Galadriel?
Yes, but it's
So
her.
is this sort of playing off of this sort of like she has a little bit of an evil circuit in her that could go off anytime?
I think it's her temptation.
Okay.
She has temptation to power, but also not in the same way as not in the same way as portrayed. Power to these directors sort of believe that it's all physical power. But she has much more of a spiritual power, I would say.
Right.
Because
you also see that with Gandalf, don't you?
What specifically?
This sort of like he won't even like engage the ring because of what I guess they're aware that, corruptio optima pessima, like they could fall so much further.
Yeah, except for they're not worried about falling. At least in the way that Tolkien would understand it. They're more worried about, they're very focused on human things, which is kind of interesting, even though they're elves and they know better.
Okay.
I would say Galadriel wants to rule a kingdom. That should be the premise of the show. If you want to manipulate her desire for power, it should be in the fact that she wants her own kingdom to rule. But this is more like, it turns more into like feminism, more like, I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I know better than you, and I'm going to seek out Sauron no matter what.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of started feeling like a dopey Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their language is also like fake Tolkien. They try to get like sort of high language into it, but none of it really makes any sense. It just feels completely off and and Galadriel's supposed to, in the timeline, she's supposed to have a husband, which apparently she does, which is revealed later, but she's also supposed to have a daughter. And that daughter is kind of Elrond's age, even though she seems more like Elrond's age in the show. And they're kind of flirty, even though Elrond is going to marry her daughter, which is weird. Like they just don't seem to understand the timeline. But anyways, so then Halbrand / Sauron and Galadriel get picked up by the Númenóreans and brought to Númenor after they sort of save each other from dying on the rafts from this whale, which, Halbrand wouldn't have died because he's Sauron, at least not in the same way as Galadriel would have. But Halbrand is much more respectful to the Númenóreans when he comes to meet them, which basically you can kind of see that he has a silver tongue. He's trying to manipulate people, but under the guise of he's trying to be kind. But Galadriel is the opposite. She has no respect for anyone, which is kind of bizarre. She's just and also, even though she's dealing with a queen, which is kind of weird. So in the storyline, Muriel is the queen regent because her father wanted to bring the people back to their old ways, and there was a mutiny against him, and they installed his daughter as queen regent. Which in the books he just dies, and then she inherits the throne, and then Ar-Pharazôn, who's like her cousin, forces her to marry him, and then takes the throne. So that's the storyline in the books. While in this, it's just Ar-Pharazôn isn't even royalty or related to the royal family. He is just a chancellor, like a greedy. He's supposed to be a greedy MAGA chancellor, if that makes sense. Like, he gives a speech about when an elf shows up. He gives a speech that Numenor is only for men, and that he will never let elves take over, which doesn't make any sense because one elf just showed up. Oh no, they're going to take over. Like, the people here are ridiculously stupid. They think that, but this is just a caricature of what people think, MAGA people think regarding immigration. They literally think that there's like one person showed up, and now everyone's worried that America is going to get taken over by migrants, and that's how they're showing that in the show. They're just basically like, oh, an elf showed up, the elves are going to take control of the kingdom. So it doesn't fit the storyline, even though one of Tolkien's big sort of things that you could kind of use if you were a liberal trying to use Tolkien's work, he's not a big fan, or he uses colonialism in a negative way in the story. So if they just sort of embodied the domination of that colonialism in the story, they would have their liberal show if they really wanted to, but they don't even know how to do that. So it's kind of pathetic. And then, so that's kind of the storyline with the Numenorians. I know, so you didn't get to that part, right?
No, that's not ringing a bell.
Okay. So, and then Elendil is the good guy in Numenor. He is his name means elf friend, and he's the one that picks up Galadriel and brings her to Numenor. And he's just some general in the show, even though
Now,
in
is
the
this the
books,
guy? I remember seeing one of the elves came and did a rock breaking contest.
that's not related to this.
Oh, it's not.
No,
Who's
that's a
that guy?
different storyline. So that's a dwarf and Elrond. Elrond and the dwarf do
Oh, that's Elrond.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
Elrond's character, or
gotcha.
his
Okay,
portrayal. But with the Numenorians, we've got Elendil as the good faction. He has his what is it? His son and daughter are with him. And Anarion is left out, but it's Isildur, and I can't remember the girl because she's made up by the story. She's not in the books. Anyways, so he's an elf friend, and he's supposed to be a cousin of Muriel. He's supposed to be in the royal line, but Muriel doesn't even know he exists. Like, she has to ask, who's that guy? Which is kind of bizarre to me. They really just kind of upend the whole concept of royalty, which is probably on purpose. They just want to make the new royalty of like Arnor and Gondor. They want them to just be random people. I think that's kind of the goal, to take out the sort of the royalty of Aragorn. Aragorn's descendants of not royalty in this story. So, and then on the flip side, you mentioned Elrond, and you and the dwarf. So Elrond is sent to the dwarves to help get labor for the building of a forge for Celebrimbor, who is eventually going to make the rings of power, or he's
I
going to
see.
make
Okay,
the elven rings of power.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I didn't quite understand where that was going either. I guess that's one of the weaknesses of the Rings of Power, right? That's the
Yep.
new. Yeah, one of the weaknesses, especially the very first episode, there was so much going on. And I'm a pretty plugged in Tolkien guy. I was very confused. So the writers did not have a very good hook for the first episode. And my
Yeah.
wife was kind of walking in and out on either one or two, and she's just like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on, right? Or like
Yeah.
when you read The Hobbit, you're like in the first 50 pages, you kind of, I don't know, who the characters are, and you're kind of moving. Actually, the first Lord of the Rings is a little meandering,
Yes.
to be honest. I kind of feel like Tolkien was a little bit not quite sure where he was going in the
Yeah.
first book. That's
There's
just
a
my
lot of people who
guess.
think that. There's a
Like,
lot of people who
who's the
think that.
guy who sings the songs and all that?
Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, that's a weird thing.
Hmm.
Uh, it almost feels like after that Tom Bombadil episode, he like got on to the trail.
Yeah.
The
Some
book is a
people, yeah.
little bit
Some people
meandering, and it's
think,
almost like the Rings of Power is like they don't know what's going on, and there wasn't enough of a hook, like a mystery or something that I wanted to know for me to keep watching it.
yeah, no, it's true. See, Tolkien, at least even in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, when it seems like he doesn't really know where he's going with it,
Yeah, yeah,
he follows one thread. He follows one group of people. The only time when he splits up with the main characters, he's
yeah,
doing it he separates them, but they're still the main characters that you're following. You're not following people you don't know. He starts
correct,
with one group
correct.
of people and then continues on. And they could have easily done that. And my whole argument is that they should have started with the elves, because the elves don't age. You start with the elves, you
Yeah,
can go through like hundreds of years and people won't mind because
exactly.
it's elves. And then you
And they
slowly,
already have a connection to what we've read or seen in the future. So
yeah.
it anchors us into a real story that we can identify. That's what they should have done.
Hmm. And then
Instead, I don't know what's going on.
you can then they could have interwoven the dwarves and men as it was necessary, because the first men don't really come into a huge play in the second age until Sauron uh goes to basically live with them, and once he starts like taking over their kingdom, then you stay with men until the end, and it's the same generation pretty much. So you would just need the same characters. But what they do is they try and have both the story of the decline of Numenor going on with the building up of the Rings of Power, and then they expect us to transition into the fall of Numenor and the War of the Last Alliance basically at the same time. And it's just convoluted. They should have done the Rings of Power, the story of how they were made first, and only about the Rings of Power. Now, at the end of the show, the last episode, they make the Rings of Power. And also it's revealed that the stranger guy, do you remember the stranger, this who fell from the sky?
Yeah, who was that?
Yeah, he was pretty much Gandalf.
That's what I thought. I mean,
Yeah. Even though
I was
Gandalf
like, this is
doesn't,
Gandalf. And now that okay, so that if I were writing the scripts, that would have been the opening scene.
yeah, I mean, it could
Gandalf
have
falling from the
worked.
sky.
It
That was
doesn't make
actually
sense
pretty
for them
cool.
to be there, though. He
But
shouldn't have been there, but that's a whole nother problem. But
it
if you're
gets
going to take from what they're going
it's
with,
entertaining. See, that's I
yes,
think the problem is they don't have a for people who are coming into it who, I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people have only seen Lord of the Rings like 1 to 3 times. You and I probably seen it. I've probably seen the films 20 times each. So I've
yeah,
seen them a lot, and I've read the books a couple times. So I'm invested. But for most people that aren't invested, they needed to create a lot more hooks somehow
but
with the content that's out there. And then the only hook that we really have is Galadriel, and she's not at all really what we've experienced in the future.
Yeah.
So for me, it's
Yeah.
dissatisfying as a consumer
Yeah,
of Rings of
exactly.
Power.
You have to start with something. You have to start with a plot that we actually know where it's going in some ways. You have to foreshadow. You have to. You can't just drop things and then expect people to wait until you reveal them. Nobody likes that. Everyone likes
No,
you to give a hint at what's going on and a direction of which things are going. And if the only direction is, oh, we think people already know this because they know Lord of the Rings, that's not a hook. That's not something that's going
right.
to make people want to watch the show. It's, you and I both know what should happen sort of in the lore, to some degree. And I would say I was bored. You were obviously bored. I continued watching because I wanted to talk about it, not really because it was the most interesting show. And I think the whole purpose of, critiquing fiction is so we can grow and we can make better fiction instead of repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
so here's one of the things that I thought was goofy: the dwarves. Okay. First off, I think we mentioned this when we were last talking, but the wives don't have beards, and that's definitely part of the humorous element of the dwarves, is that
Yeah.
they have beards, right?
Yeah, they're not very serious characters in some degree. There has to be levity, and that levity really doesn't exist in the Rings of Power.
Yes. And it's like the dwarves were kind of like Nordic, Celtic, Scottish type personalities, And it seemed like in this new one that was erased. And of
Yeah,
course, if you want to go there, we can get into the ethnicities.
yeah. Even though I would argue that the actors who portrayed, sort of the what we would call token characters that are just, different races that didn't, that wouldn't have existed in Lord of the Rings or anything. Those actors are surprisingly better than most of the regular actors. I think Elrond's character or actor was terrible. Galadriel's actor wasn't very good.
You're talking about
Um,
in the new series?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think the sort of, we can talk about sort of the black elf Arondir. He was
Hmm.
actually one of the better actors of the show. Of course, it doesn't make sense the context of having, a black elf or having a black dwarf. Like those things don't make sense given the sort of the setup Tolkien had, given that it was basically a lore for England. England is you know, the the focal point of Tolkien's storytelling.
Yeah.
But
And
they
then
at
what
least
was what
had
was
some
the
good
story
actors.
with it's like a halfling tribe, the kids who find the Gandalf?
Yeah, the Harfoots.
Yeah. Now what's a Harfoot?
A Harfoot is so there are three kinds of hobbits that
Yep.
eventually intermingle
Hmm.
and then they become the hobbits that you know
Right.
in the
Okay.
movies. Now they wouldn't exist at this point, of course, just as Gandalf wouldn't be around. Harfoots are just made up versions of hobbits. I mean, the name comes from
Are
Tolkien, but they don't
Okay, so
they don't
Tolkien does reference them.
he references the type. It's
Where?
not at all what he
Where
imagined.
where does he reference them?
He I think it might be in regarding hobbits. I think
Oh, so it's not in like The Hobbit or the trilogy or
no, it is. I think there's the first chapter, I think, of Lord of the Rings is on hobbits or regarding
Oh, right, right,
hobbits,
right. Yeah.
and it
Gotcha.
just gives history of hobbits and what they are. So
Okay.
I think he mentioned there's stores, Harfoots, and proud something. I can't remember. There are three types of
Okay.
hobbits that exist, but they
Yeah,
don't
it's Stewards. I'm looking it up here and Follow Hides. Is that right?
follow hides. Yeah,
Yeah.
stores, follow hides, and Harfoots.
Yeah.
They eventually marry and they all become sort of one hobbit race.
Right.
It-
Okay.
but their culture is nowhere like it's not like it is in the show. In the show, they're kind of psychotic. They basically are these nomadic peoples that leave people behind whenever they're like weak. Basically, if you're weak, you die. It doesn't matter. They don't take care of each other really. You're weak, you're going to die. We're not going to protect you.
Yeah, I'm reading this site here talking about how they're nomadic people. They don't stick around.
Yeah. So
Beardless, bootless. Yeah. Okay.
so they find Gandalf, but Gandalf doesn't know anything for some reason. It doesn't make any sense, the context of like what's going on. Like, why does Gandalf know nothing? Why can't he why doesn't he understand his own magic? He didn't come into this world knowing
Well,
absolutely nothing.
there was an interesting element here that it seems that I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt. It seems that by entering into the Middle Earth atmosphere or whatever, he lost. But he when he looks at the stars, if I remember correctly, he knows that. So it's almost like if he were outside of that world, he would be okay. But since he's underneath this canopy, he's disoriented. But he does know the stars, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, they're definitely trying to make it work. In the books, he comes over by ship. Like, he doesn't fall from the sky. He gets sent over by ship, meets Círdan. Círdan gives him one of the rings of power, and then he just kind of goes about his business.
Okay.
And that sort of thing. But so Gandalf meets these hobbits, these hobbit-ish people, and he's a bit of a problem because he's an outsider and they don't like outsiders. And eventually they're these witches, or these witches who I think are supposed to be three of the Nazgul that show up and try and think he's Sauron, and basically say, we are here to serve you, Sauron. And then eventually this Gandalf figure saves the Harfoots from them, and they kind of disappear or die, and their wraith form, you can see their wraith form. You know how there's like in Lord of the Rings, you can
I thought the Nazgul
the
were kings, not women.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
so they got that wrong.
They haven't called them Nazgul. I'm just saying that
Okay.
when they died, their spirits looked like Nazgul. They were white and, like spirit form, and they were sent away. Now,
Okay.
it doesn't make a lot of sense because I don't know where the 10 rings for men are, because Sauron hasn't even made the Ring of Power yet. So some of it doesn't make sense, but at least visually speaking, it looks like ring wraiths, and they're witches. And technically one of them, so there's the Witch King of Angmar. He's a guy. He goes by witch, I think, to point out that he's evil, not because it's some gender thing. Wizards are good in Tolkien's work, and witches are bad. I guess that's kind of
right.
Which makes sense given the witch trials and just witchcraft and the occult and stuff like that. Basically, witches are trying to manipulate the spiritual plane, and wizards are just following the rules of the spiritual plane. I guess that's probably a good way of differentiating them. Does that sound right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of what the logic of having, wizards versus witches. That's always seemed to me that the difference in these types of things is
I
that
always thought etymologically in English, a wizard is a male witch and a witch is a female wizard, right?
Well, I always thought that too, but you've got Tolkien using it not that way. You have the
Right.
Witch King of Angmar, who's a male Nazgul
Okay.
who is evil, and then you've got Gandalf, who is a wizard who is also an angel.
Right.
So it's just, I don't know if he thought that was just a cool way of doing it or if there was more to it than that, but that's, I'm just trying to guess what he's meaning based on that.
Right.
But
Okay.
yeah. So we have that group, and basically at the end of the show, the main hobbit, who's basically female Frodo, goes off with Gandalf in search of whatever is east, because these evil witches were telling Gandalf that he, as Sauron, as they thought he was Sauron, that there were people waiting for him in the east, and that some power or whatever, that sort of thing. Something bad is happening in the east. So Gandalf is going to go east, and the Hobbit girl is going to follow him. And that's the end of the Hobbit story in the first season.
Okay.
Now, Elrond and Durin are also fighting over Mithril, sort of, not really fighting, but they're trying to get Durin's father to give over the Mithril, because the Mithril apparently is going to save the elves, because apparently the elves are dying. So there's this plot twist that the elves are withering away because they don't have access to the light of the two trees anymore for some reason, even though that's not how that works. They didn't, that would mean that all elves that didn't see the light of the two trees would be dead. But anyways, so they're looking for Mithril, which is apparently the creation of basically a elf and a Balrog fighting over a Silmarillion, over a Silmaril. And then that creates Mithril, which is not how Tolkien had it work, but Mithril is going to save them. Anyways, it all comes to a sort of a stupid plot line, because they just get a little bit of it. They're arguing with the dwarves, and then they get a little bit of it, and that's what they take, and then they make the rings of power with it. And eventually, back in Numenor, they decide that Halbrand is the king of these Southlands, which is where these people live, that the human village that we saw earlier. And he needs to go lead his people. And they eventually convince the queen to send an army led by Elendil and herself and Galadriel, and they go and they defeat the orcs, but the orcs manage to basically erupt Mount Doom, and then Mount Doom turns the land into Mordor. And then the lava burns the queen's eyes, so she can't see anything. She's blind now. And Isildur, quote unquote, dies. No way he's dead. And a horse is going to go look after him or find him eventually. That's how they kind of leave his story. And then Halbrand somehow got hurt by a lance, even though there weren't any fighting going on. It was just ash. So he somehow is injured, and then Galadriel takes him up to where the elven smiths are working, and Halbrand helps them build the rings of power, and then she becomes suspicious and asks about his lineage, and learns that the person she thought he was doesn't exist. So there's no king of the Southlands, and that he's actually Sauron. And then they kind of have an argument over things, and he tries to convince her that he is good, and that he's trying, that he is, he's trying to do good, and that he's not a problem or whatever. And this is kind of where she has like a dream sequence where she talks to her brother again, where her brother tries to convince her to not impede Sauron, not to hinder him. And basically, and he says, remember what I told you previously, which was, to touch the darkness, and that sort of thing. And it seems like she rejects that view of things. She decides to no, she won't serve Sauron, and then she helps the the elves make the three rings, and then Halbrand, or Sauron now, returns to Mordor, where presumably he will make the One Ring. And that's kind of the basis for the show. That was a very quick.
So is that the last episode? What you
Yeah.
just explained there? Okay.
Basically, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, the dwarves don't really have anything else to do with the show, which is kind of weird.
Okay.
The dwarves just kind of get abandoned. Their plot line is completely ignored, and it seemed like useless. All they needed was a little bit of mithril, and then they turned that into the Rings of Power, or the Three Rings.
Yeah.
So unless there's also a theory that Sauron already made the Rings of Power, the other Rings of Power, because there's 10 for men, and then 7 for the dwarves, and then 1 ring. So one theory I think is that he's already made the others, and then he was just, I don't know why he needed to make the 3 rings, but he didn't make the 3 rings. Celebrimbor did, just like the books. So Rings of Power ends with the Rings of Power, which I think is kind of stupid. That should be most of the first season if you were to do an actual Rings of Power show, if you wanted to make it good.
So do you know who the chief writer is or creative director is, and what do we know about this person?
There are 2 creators. I can't remember their names, but they basically have done nothing prior. They are basically no names.
Are they Tolkien geeks? Like, do they know their stuff? It doesn't seem
they
like they
rejected Amazon basically ignored Peter Jackson. My understanding is that Peter Jackson wanted to help them if he could, and they just ghosted him, supposedly.
Okay.
And so yeah, these people they haven't done like anything before, anything notable. All they want to do is create they want to make Tolkien for the new people. They want modernism Tolkien. That's kind of what they want. And basically there's a expert on Tolkien that worked on the show for a bit and then basically got either fired or had to leave the show because they were taking the show into a direction he couldn't abide.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't know if you've heard that the whole Christopher Tolkien death, how his death probably impacted the creation of the show.
No, can you tell that?
Yeah, so Christopher Tolkien was the head of the Tolkien estate before he died. He was his father's caretaker, and he had negotiated that Amazon couldn't change anything to the lore of that had precisely been stated by Tolkien. So if Tolkien said it, they couldn't change it. That was kind of my understanding of how it was. But then Christopher died during pre-production of the show, and nobody at the Tolkien Society cares that much, or sorry, not Tolkien Society, Tolkien Estate. Nobody cares enough to try and stop them. Like, they just want to make the money, and a lot of the grandchildren, my understanding, I could be wrong, seem to be, they're just kind of like, they're okay with modern interpretations of Tolkien's work. Christopher didn't even like the movies, the original movies, and that sort of thing. So with his death, this whole not changing Tolkien lore went out the window, even though legally speaking they couldn't change anything. And my understanding is they had a big rewrite and they changed everything, and this is what we got.
Okay. Because my observation is, when I meet people and this comes up, anyone who's even slightly invested in Tolkien doesn't like it, has a negative response to the new Amazon series. Whereas when the Peter Jackson films came out, everybody who was a Tolkien enthusiast said, well, this isn't quite right, or I don't like how they did this or this and that. But generally, there was glee and excitement about the films, the Peter Jackson films. Generally, it was a
Yeah.
positive feeling. People liked it.
Yeah, no,
This
it's
is the exact opposite.
true. Yeah, that is kind of the deal, I would say, that people are much less interested in this show from a Tolkien perspective. I don't really know how many people have actually watched the show. I don't trust Amazon's uh basic them telling you how many people watched it. It's not like anyone can it's not like anyone could look back and say, okay, this is how many people actually watched it. Amazon's just telling you their own numbers.
Right.
So we don't really have any way of grasping how popular it was. And I don't think the reviews on Amazon were very good, and I don't think the reviews on what is it, Rotten Tomatoes was very good either. So it
Yeah. I
doesn't
mean,
seem
I
to me.
wanted to like it.
Me
I
too.
wanted to.
I mean, I didn't see a lot of what I like. I didn't see much hope, if that makes sense. It didn't seem to me that we, based on all the marketing and stuff. Did you see the marketing and stuff?
I don't remember.
Because it was just like it's just really bad images. The trailers were pretty bad looking, and they were all just promoting the diversity and that sort of thing, and that was it.
Okay.
And the trailers didn't tell you anything about the story, and it makes me think that they again still didn't know really how they were going to do it, and they may have just edited it the way they thought it was going to best be. Definitely I've heard it said a camel. It's a bill made by committee. Uh,
Mm,
this is basically a committee made TV show. I don't think there was any one writer. I think there was a whole room of writers.
right.
So you can't
Well, if
make.
you contrast that to like The Mandalorian, which was very successful,
Mhm.
they actually used different directors, I think, for episodes on Mandalorian.
Well,
But
Mandalorian had one vision.
exactly.
Yeah. And the successor, the one who had learned everything he could from George Lucas, who was kind of his protege, was the creator of The Mandalorian.
Right. And it's a very linear when you sit down to watch, okay, I watched 4 and then, next week I'm going to watch 5 or whatever. You definitely know where you've been and you have an idea of where we need to go or what's going to happen next. It's a linear show and it's nice. And they could have, whoever created the Rings of Power could have learned a lot from that by
Yeah.
keeping it. And surprisingly, Mandalorian, I think, was pretty cheap to make. Like, it's kind of low budget when you think about it.
Yeah. Well, they kind of messed everything up with the Star Wars movies, so they at that point they uh probably couldn't put too much money into making something that they weren't sure was going to be popular.
Right. But it
And
turned out
then
to be. And
yeah.
and what did Mandalorian do that made it so instantly successful? Two of the most popular icons in Star Wars lore are
Boba
Yoda
Fett.
and Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
those two images, like, just you don't need the same actor you need from the early 80s, right? They're both masked
That's
people,
true, yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it looks like, even though it's not Boba Fett and it's not Yoda, they look like it, and you are instantly attached. Like, your sentimental self is like, I love Boba Fett, I love Yoda. This is kind of the same thing. Let's sit down and watch it. You're instantly connected with the old story. This doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And
The
the only thing we have really is Galadriel, and it's like a different person.
What's crazy is they really could have. I mean, the elves would have looked kind of old, but I would have taken old over this. They could have kept the same actors for the elves. They could have had Hugo Weaving do Elrond, and they could have had Kate Blanchett portray Galadriel. These are immortal figures. You don't have to.
True.
You don't. I think people would have been fine seeing older looking versions of them, younger
You think?
than
You think?
I think than terrible actors.
Yeah.
Like,
I
would
just,
you
and it's
rather
been
a
a long
terrible?
time. Like they look different. Like when Legolas was Legolas in The Hobbit? Yeah.
Yeah.
They used the same actor.
Don't get me wrong. It's not that
He
it
looked
would.
older.
It's not that it wouldn't be like.
But I guess honestly, I
You know,
prefer the older and it's the same guy than totally different person.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, this is just the problem when you make things that are when you try and go backwards in the story.
Yeah, I mean, they could have at least had like if not Gandalf, someone like Gandalf, or
Oh yeah, Ian McKellen could have played Gandalf because Gandalf is literally an
totally.
old man, no
Yeah,
matter what.
he'd even look better as Gandalf now.
Yeah, exactly. So he's an old man no matter what, but
Yeah.
they wanted you to think, "Oh, who is this?" Even though everyone was like pretty much like, "This is Gandalf. Why are you trying to hide this?" Even a lot of people were like, "This is Sauron." Because that's the thing, is like with these stories, it's not supposed to necessarily surprise you given the information that you already know going in. If you know the
Right.
story, you should know what's going to happen because that's the whole point of an adaptation.
Exactly. Well, and it's
Like,
also cool when you're moving along and then there's associations, but then you bump into a real association. Another example, I keep going back to it, Mandalorian. Finally, at the end of the season, I think it's the last episode where Luke Skywalker shows up.
that's the second season, but yeah.
It's a second season?
Yeah, that's the second
Yeah,
season.
yeah. But what's beautiful about that is you watch it through the security cams, if I remember correctly.
True. Yeah, that
like
is
from a directing point of view, that's actually very cool. It was kind of like Hitchcockish or something.
Yeah,
Like you're like, he's coming, and you're like, wait a second, is that he's got a green lightsaber? He's doing the same move. Is that Luke? Oh, that's Luke. Luke Skywalker's here, and it's so exciting, right? Because you're bumping up into the lore you already know.
Yeah,
right.
You're trying,
and it's authentic.
yeah.
Like, okay, we're like going back into the universe narrative, the meta narrative that I know, and things are coming back together. And maybe I just haven't watched enough of Rings of Power, but
No, that's
yeah.
There's not a lot of connections. There's like I think one of the lines, there's like some lines that kind of call back, but they feel so poorly placed into the story that it doesn't seem like a callback. It just seems like it's, oh, you just tried to take one line in from the movies and put it into
Right.
these. Because I think Gandalf says, "Go back to the shadows from whence you came," but it doesn't like to these bad guys. But it doesn't come off the same way exactly. It just comes off like, okay, you were just trying to subvert all of our expectations this entire time, and all the characters are not acting like the characters we knew. But then suddenly they say words that are similar or the same to what they would have. You have to pick one or the other. You have to be the same. You have to have the same characters, or you're using different characters. Pick one of them and go with it. Because you can't do this weird thing where you make everyone think that these people don't act or resemble like their other counterparts. But then you're trying to say, oh, now they say the exact same lines as their counterparts. Just seems off-putting.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely lacking.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of the Rings of Power. We can get into just fiction in general, if you don't have anything else necessarily.
Yeah, we could talk fiction. Let's do that.
So you wrote The Sword and the Serpent, and would you say that's historical fiction or just straight up fiction, or how would you classify that?
Yeah, it's historical fiction. So the opening scene of the first book, Sword and Serpent, takes place in the year of our Lord 299. And this is actually a depiction of a historical event. So in 299, they were doing the oracles. So they have a haruspex, and basically the emperors would have these fortune tellers that would cut open the livers and kidneys of animals and look at them and say, you're going to win this battle, or here's what's in store for the empire, and kind of guide the emperor into making battle and political decisions. Well, they kept failing. They could not do it. And in 299, while they were doing one of these, a servant who was standing nearby, part of the court, made the sign of the cross. And it thwarted the fortune telling, right? The looking into the organs.
Yeah.
And they realized the reason we're not getting results through our magic like we used to for hundreds of years is there's these Christians in the court.
Gotcha.
And that realization is what sparked the Diocletian persecution. There's 10 Roman persecutions. The Diocletian persecution was the 10th one, and it was the worst and most violent Roman persecution. It basically 299 to 303 and to 305. And that's when many of the saints that you know lived and died under martyrdom. And so that's the opening of the book. And then it tells the story of a young man named Jurian, who is Gergos in Greek, which in English is George, St. George. And then there's a parallel story of a young girl named Sabra, who's a priestess for Moloch in North Africa. And she's assigned to take a lottery and assign children to be sacrificed every month to this god who lives in a cave and is a dragon something no one's ever really seen, but he's rumored to be a dragon. So it's a story of St. George and the dragon placed in a historically accurate context with historically accurate emperors, politicians, saints. The bishops at each town are all researched to be the proper bishop as they travel and move around the Mediterranean and Rome and Egypt and all these places. So these books came out. The first one came out in, I think, 2015 or 16. It's a trilogy, and my trilogy is actually a little longer than Tolkien's trilogy. I made it longer. But yeah, it's exciting. The first two books are Amazon bestsellers, and people seem to like them, and I'm always happy when I meet people and they've read the trilogy and get to ask them who their favorite character was. And the main characters are, from a Catholic point of view, St. George, his sort of friend and sidekick is St. Christopher, who you know is St. Christopher, and his mentor and guide, like spiritually, and his development and his character is a young St. Nicholas, not the old St. Nicholas with gray hair, but a young, redheaded, red beard St. Nicholas, who's a young priest, who is kind of a Gandalf character. He bilocates. He's kind of a Padre Pio. He has lots of spiritual gifts. He has exorcism powers. And he always has like the wisdom and ability to help George and the other characters through the book. And then, of course, George at the end of the first book does engage the dragon. I don't want to give anything away. It's kind of a cool ending.
Don't give it away. But yeah, no, I love that you have your feet kind of everywhere. You know, sort of in theology, in podcasting, in politics, as well as in fiction. And I think that's just a wonderful setup. So we're gonna wrap this up soon. But why do you think it's important for Catholics to participate in fiction and be active in that capacity?
Well, I mean, you think about who had the most influence in the 1900s, and you know, I can name very important theologians like Father Garrigou-Lagrange and others, but the impact, you know, you look at just Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and you could name other great authors as well. But there is this deep human desire to understand principles, not just in a discursive way, but within the art of storytelling. And how do we know that that's the truth? Because our Lord Jesus Christ taught his theology mostly through parables, which are stories.
Yeah.
And I think we humans are, by his design, programmed for long form stories. The resurrection of long format human storytelling is manifest in the podcast space. We used to have 30-minute sitcoms. Now we have hour shows, and now we have these streaming services and all that. But we also have podcasts that go 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 3.5 hour. And I think we humans, the way God made us is we sit around a fire at night, and there's no TV in the old days.
Yeah.
And a bard tells a story for 3 hours, and it's enjoyable, and it's funny, and it's scary, and all these things. And there's a human connection. Even little children, I have 8 kids, before you go to bed, Daddy, tell me a story. So I think it's just part of being human. Yes, I'm an author. I've written 11 books, but being a storyteller, I think, is just part of being a human. Every dad and mom should be able to tell their kid a story, keep their attention, and have some sort of creative fun, or be able to tell a ghost story, or, a story about knights or a princess. And, it's just essential to who we are. And so I kind of, even though I do philosophy and I do theology and I do politics and history, I started writing fiction just by honestly telling my kids stories, and then it just sort of snowballs.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, no, that's a beautiful way of explaining why we need fiction. And, that's one of my big focuses on this channel, along with history and just Catholic culture. So as we wrap up, I just wanted to say that on the link, there's a few links down in the description. I did an episode with the Father Abbot from Clear Creek Abbey. It's a really fun episode. It's a short interview, but monks don't always have time for interviews. And then one I did with Charles Coulombe, that was in person at the Blessed Charles Symposium, and that's great. I'm also, next Tuesday, we're going to have a Catholic election night show. It's going to be
Nice.
a long live stream. I'm not sure how long it's going to go, and it might start around 6 p.m. It might start later. It just depends on when people are available to jump in. But some special guests are going to pop up in and out throughout the night. And Taylor, you have a new book that came out. Can you tell us about it and where people can find it?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. My new book is Antichrist and Apocalypse, and it's a 2-part book. The first half of the book looks at all the church fathers, the scriptures, the popes, the magisterium on who and what is the Antichrist. And then the second half of the book is a verse by verse commentary from the church fathers, the popes, and Thomas Aquinas, Robert Bellarmine, other great saints and doctors of the church, verse by verse through the book of Revelation. So if you're confused about the book of Revelation, end times, what do all these things mean? I don't go into is it now or who is it now or anything like that. I think that's kind of silly, but I do go through what all the great saints and fathers have said about these controversial topics. So it's Antichrist and Apocalypse. You can get it at Catholic Bookstore or Amazon.com.
Awesome. Also, I'll probably be getting that on audiobook, because I know Kennedy Hall is did the audiobook, so I'm probably going to be getting it.
Yep.
Do that. I listened to Infiltration on audiobook as well, which is great. I like to read fiction sort of in a paperback or a hardcover, I like to have it with
Mhm.
me. I have Sword and the Serpent.
Yeah, there it is. Awesome.
So everyone needs to check that out. There's a link to it's in the name of Taylor Marshall's channel is Taylor Marshall, and it is in the description as well. You know, odds that you're watching me and don't know who he is anyways are pretty low. So but check out his work and go get his books. Thank you all for listening. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a blessed evening as well as a happy Holy Souls Day. Okay,
Amen. Thank you, Connor.
no problem. Bye. Okay.